April 1189. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, takes vows to crusade to the Holy Land. This is in response to news that the Sultan Saladin had, in 1187, conquered Jerusalem and virtually the entire kingdom of Jerusalem. Although he is nearly 70 years old, Frederick still is an energetic ruler. His long and successful reign has gained him great power across Germany, and he is now eager to crown his career with a campaign to recapture the Holy Land. However, Frederick is no naive crusader. As a young man, he fought under Conrad III of Germany, who led an army to the east during the Second Crusade. Frederick well remembers the problems experienced by Conrad's army. Above all, Frederick recalls the dangerous journey across Asia Minor, where the Seljuk Turks had brutally defeated Conrad's knights in 1147. Frederick is eager to avoid Conrad's mistakes and intends to meticulously organize his army for the long campaign. He dispatches envoys to secure safe passage in the lands through which his army must pass on its journey. Frederick exchanges envoys with the Byzantine Empire. Envoys from the Byzantine Emperor, Isaac Angelus, assure Frederick that the German army will be permitted to safely move through Byzantine territory. However, in truth, Isaac views Frederick as an enemy. Recently, Frederick had forged an alliance with the Normans of Sicily, an avowed enemy of Byzantium. Furthermore, Isaac is terrified by the notion of a large German army moving through his territory, where it could do immense damage. Ultimately, Isaac believes Frederick's crusade is a fraud, and that the German ruler intends nothing less than the conquest of Constantinople itself. Although he's confirmed a peace with Frederick, Isaac contacts the target of the crusade, Saladin, and the two confirm a treaty. Isaac promises Saladin that he will do all that he can to inhibit the German army as it crosses the Byzantine Empire. In addition, Frederick exchanges envoys with another major power that controls part of his route, the Seljuk Turks, who rule much of eastern Anatolia. The Seljuk Sultan also agrees to friendship with Frederick, promising that the German crusaders will be able to pass peacefully through Seljuk territory. Having taken care of diplomatic matters, Frederick Barbarossa departs from Regensburg on May 11, 1189, at the head of the largest crusader army ever to set out for the east. Marching with him is his son, Frederick, the Duke of Swabia, and most of the important German nobility. It's a momentous event, the crowning achievement of a long and triumphant reign. As the great crusader host passes through the towns of Germany, the citizens cheer. Many feel certain that such a tremendous force, led by so wise an emperor, will succeed in retaking the Holy Land. Frederick's march proves to be a model of discipline. Historian Christopher Tyerman states, in sharp contrast to Louis VII's ordinances for his crusade army in 1147, Frederick's were enforced. Loutish behavior led to the loss of hands, theft to execution. Such harsh discipline was coupled with a constant emphasis on the pious nature of the operation. The general effect on morale and military effectiveness stood in marked contrast to the shambles into which Conrad III's army had descended in Asia Minor in the autumn of 1147. Frederick and his army passed through Hungary, where King Bela III and his wife Queen Margaret, a daughter of King Louis VII of France, welcomed them. The Hungarians provide lodging, supplies, and markets for the Crusaders. After a comfortable stay in Hungary, the Germans enter into Byzantine territory on July 2nd. Almost immediately, they are harassed by armed bands. At Niš, Frederick encounters Serbian rebels who ask the Germans to join them in an uprising against the Byzantines. Frederick refuses, stating that his mission is to liberate the Holy Land, not to fight with other Christians. However, as the march continues, ambushes from local forces intensify. Increasingly, the journey resembles a fighting march. The Germans capture some of their attackers, who, before being hanged, claim that they are acting on the instructions of the Byzantine Emperor. When they reach Sofia on August 13, the Crusaders find that Isaac's promised markets have been withdrawn. After fighting their way through the mountains, the Crusaders reach Philippopolis, which has been abandoned by its Byzantine defenders, its fortifications dismantled on Isaac's orders. More than a decade before 1204, the Byzantines are already displaying remarkable confusion and impotence under Isaac's rule. As the Crusaders enter the abandoned Philippopolis, Frederick learns that his envoys at the Byzantine court have been thrown into prison. He also receives tactless communications from Isaac, demanding hostages to guarantee good behavior from the Germans and a share of future conquests. Isaac's refusal to afford Frederick his proper title in this correspondence is the icing on the cake. The Holy Roman Emperor is in no mood to negotiate, especially since it's becoming increasingly clear that he has the military advantage. He responds angrily to Isaac's message, demanding that his envoys be released and that the Byzantines provide peaceful passage to the Crusader army. Isaac releases the envoys, but shows fickleness in making any agreement of peaceful relations. Meanwhile, Frederick's troops occupy Philippopolis and the surrounding territory, securing food and markets through their own prowess. Frederick settles on a strategy to force the Byzantines to cooperate. Isaac Angelus is an understandably nervous ruler. He came to power in a particularly bloody coup, and he himself remains fearful of insurrection. He worries that the very presence of the German army may spark rebellion among already restive regions. Despite Isaac's paranoia, historians today find little evidence to justify the idea that Barbarossa had prior designs on the Byzantine Empire. Christopher Tyerman states, Frederick kept his eyes fixed firmly on the goal of the Holy Land and Jerusalem. He saw himself as a knight of Christ, bound to avenge the events of 1187, not an indiscriminate hammer of Islam, or anybody else. Indeed, it's Isaac's own hostility toward Frederick that ultimately provokes German conquest of Byzantine territory. Frederick next captures Adrianople, which he establishes as a headquarters. He occupies Thrace and makes contact with rebels in the Balkans. At this point, Frederick appears to be seriously contemplating an attack on Constantinople. Byzantine forces seem powerless to oppose Frederick's garrisons and foragers. Increasingly panicked, Isaac again asks Frederick to negotiate, only to again abruptly end negotiations on Christmas Eve, just when a deal seems imminent. Isaac's military feebleness and diplomatic schizophrenia cause his policy to implode. The Byzantine chronicler, Nikitas Konyatis, disdainfully records Isaac's incompetence. Left with no choice, Isaac capitulates. In the end, Frederick proves remarkably lenient. On February 14, 1190, he confirms an agreement with Isaac that guarantees the Germans safe passage through the remainder of the empire, ships to carry them across the Hellespont at Gallipoli, and access to markets at reasonable rates. In return, Frederick promises to avoid Constantinople and withdraw from Byzantine territory. For all his bravado, Isaac Angelus has shown himself an impotent, weak ruler whose own paranoia brought on the very disaster he'd initially feared. Byzantine chronicler Nikitas Konyatis judges the whole affair as Isaac himself bringing ruin upon his own empire. The German army next departs Byzantine territory, and yet their greatest challenge awaits them in the lands of the Seljuk Turks. April 25, 1190. The German Crusaders, at last enter into territory under the control of the Seljuk Turkish Sultan of Rum, Kili Arslan II. Previous agreements with the Sultan had produced promises of friendship, safe passage, and markets for the Crusaders in Seljuk territory. However, as in the Byzantine Empire, prior negotiated agreements proved worthless. Unbeknownst to the Crusaders, Kili Arslan's son, Qutb al-Din, the son-in-law of Saladin, has effectively usurped his father and is now preparing his forces to oppose the Germans. On May 7, near Philomelium, the Crusaders encounter a Turkish ambush. The Emperor's son, Frederick of Swabia, leads a counterattack that decisively repulses the Turks, who suffer heavy casualties. The Crusaders press on through the rugged terrain, beating back Turkoman raids and increasingly suffering from hunger. Despite these difficulties, the German forces struggle on and maintain incredible discipline. They fight their way to the city of Iconium, the capital of the Seljuk Turks. Although some of the leading men in the army want to press on, Barbarossa insists that they take the city, rather than leave it as an enemy stronghold at their rear. On May 18, outside Iconium, the Crusaders come up against Qutb al-Din's main army. What follows is a pitched battle, and the most formidable challenge yet faced by Frederick's crusade. The Emperor divides his army in two, with his son Duke Frederick attacking the city, while the old Emperor himself faces off against the Turkish army. Although the Turks outnumber the Christians, the German knights deliver a cavalry charge that shatters Qutb al-Din's divisions. The Turks are beaten and suffer casualties numbering in the thousands. Iconium falls to the Christian army, and the Germans pillage it at their leisure. It's a moment of incredible triumph. The Turks are utterly defeated, and Iconium yields immense booty to the Crusaders. Broken and humiliated, Qutb al-Din is removed from power, and his father again resumes rule of the Sultanate. Kili Arslan II resumes his compliant policy toward Frederick, who agrees to a peace if his army is provided with Turkish hostages and supplies. The Sultan submits to these terms. Triumphant, the German Crusaders march unopposed through Seljuk territory. Frederick Barbarossa and his army have just achieved something remarkable. They have completed the longest and most dangerous portions of the treacherous crossing through Asia Minor, despite opposition from the two greatest powers in the region, the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Turks. Frederick's knights have crushed the Sultan's men in battle and sacked the Turkish capital. The German Crusaders, far from home, have utterly dominated two formidable enemies. This is no small achievement. The Second Crusade and the Crusade of 1101 were both badly defeated by the Turks of Asia Minor. Not since Bohemond and the First Crusade has a major Crusader army from overseas so triumphed over the Turks of Asia Minor. Frederick has done it. But Barbarossa's crusade is rarely remembered for this remarkable military operation, which is a model of discipline and ranks as one of the outstanding feats of the medieval era. How many armies, so far from home, could overcome two powerful enemies in succession on their home turf? Instead, it's subsequent and rather random events that have come to define Frederick's crusade in the popular imagination. Some weeks later, the German Crusaders march into the friendly territory of Christian Armenia. There, on June 10, as the army is crossing the River Salif, some unknown event takes place that ends the life of the great Holy Roman Emperor. What exactly happens? How exactly does the Emperor die? The sources disagree, so we aren't certain. Some accounts say that the army is crossing the river, and the Emperor's horse trips and Frederick falls in. Other accounts state that some unknown accident takes place, causing the emperor to fall. Other sources relate that the army has already laid camp, and the emperor goes down to bathe, but then is injured in some accident or episode. Some accounts say that after the emperor is pulled from the water by his men, he lies ill in bed for 10 days before finally dying. Historians today still puzzle over the mystery, and it seems likely that the elderly emperor could have suffered from a heart attack or a stroke. It's not surprising that a man of his age might be suffering from some latent medical condition that could manifest itself in sudden death. Regardless of what happens, Frederick dies. His followers are devastated. But contrary to popular belief, this tragedy does not lead to the dissolution of the Crusade. The German army, fresh from its victories in Anatolia, is fully intact. They mourn their emperor, but they continue on under the capable leadership of Barbarossa's son, Frederick of Swabia, who's shown incredible skill during the operations against the Byzantines and the Turks. The Crusaders continue on to Antioch. It is here that the German crusade finally breaks down, defeated not by Byzantines or Turks, but by disease. An epidemic breaks out in Antioch, which takes the lives of many members of the German army. At this point, some of the survivors return home, while some continue on to the Holy Land under the Duke of Swabia. By October 1190, Frederick of Swabia arrives at the siege of Acre with some 700 knights. From Acre, Frederick writes to his brother, the new Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, asking him to request papal recognition for the German hospital at the siege camp of Acre. Interestingly, it's this German hospital that gives birth to the Teutonic Knights, a German crusading order that will have a major role to play in the Northern Crusades. Frederick of Swabia himself dies of illness at Acre in early 1191. A much reduced German coalition continues to serve at Acre under the command of Duke Leopold of Austria. However, at this point, the German army has been so reduced in numbers by disease that it no longer plays a major role in the crusade. Rather, it's primarily the forces of Richard the Lionheart and Philip II of France that will wage the war against Saladin. Frederick's death is untimely and tragic, but we should not forget the remarkable victories of his campaign. The German army demonstrated incredible competence and skill over the course of the grueling war in Asia Minor. Historian G.A. Loud writes, while clearly suffering severely as it marched through Asia Minor, Frederick's army was far from being defeated there. Indeed, in capturing Iconium and securing the submission of Kili Arslan, the emperor gained a significant military victory. And finally, it is not the emperor's own death that spells doom for the German contingent. Without the epidemic at Antioch, the German army could have continued intact under the emperor's son, a proven commander who had the loyalty of the German forces. Perhaps the best testament on Frederick's behalf comes from one of his enemies, the Byzantine chronicler Nikitas Konyatis, who despised his own emperor and yet had this to say about Frederick. He was a man who deserved to enjoy a blessed and perpetual memory. His burning passion for Christ was greater than that of any Christian monarch of his time. Following the example of the Apostle Paul, he did not count his life dear to him, but pressed forward, even to die for the name of Christ.
And you can